Well, if you've been paying attention to the media, the propaganda on social media, if you've been paying attention to the propaganda coming out of the Pentagon over the past couple of months, Venezuela is at the heart of the American drug problem. All of that fentanyl pouring across our border into the United States is coming out of Venezuela, apparently. Well, you know that that's not true at all. In fact, the numbers are pretty dismal. Had Senator Rand Paul, of course, here on the show saying that that is a total farce. But where exactly are these drugs coming from? Well, our next guest, Dan Cohen from Uncaptured Media, has been analyzing a number of reports from U.S. law enforcement specifically and has a startling take on all of this. Dan, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Good to be with you. Good to see you too.
All right. So the fentanyl, first of all, maybe the first part of this before we get into where it's actually coming from. I mean, the idea that Venezuela is at the heart of this massive drug trade. What do you say about that in your reporting?
I mean, it's, firstly, it's just absurd. And I think pretty much everybody knows that the whole push is falling flat. This whole looming intervention, war on Venezuela, and these strikes on these little boats in the Caribbean it's wildly unpopular. And most people, I think, see right through it. And, Venezuela has never been associated certainly with fentanyl and much less with drug trafficking at all, cocaine. I mean, the vast majority of the cocaine, as everyone knows, comes out of Colombia, the U.S. ally for many, many years. And that's basically a result of how the U.S. has engineered the Colombian political economy. And a lot of it is trafficked through Ecuador, which is now a puppet state of the U.S., and also through Peru. So Venezuela, there's negligible amounts of cocaine moving through Venezuela, and it's illicit. The government is not involved in it. The cartel of the Suns is a total fabrication of U.S. intelligence, and so it's a totally false pretext. And I think everyone knows it.
So can you then lay out where you think that some of the drugs are coming from, if we were sincere about stopping that? Which who knows the level of sincerity?
Right. Well, most people, I think, if you would ask them, where is fentanyl coming from? Of course, we should say that the opioid crisis has been going on since the late 1990s, since 1999. There are well over 1 million people, mostly young and middle-aged, 15 to 44 years old, have died from opioid overdoses. And the worst period of that was 2020 to 2022, 23. I mean, it skyrocketed under a, I'm using air quotes here, pandemic. And this is all closely related, as I'm going to demonstrate in further investigations. But you can't really understate the severity of the opioid epidemic. I mean, crisis, epidemic, it hardly describes how many people have been killed. So it is really the most pertinent question, I think, in America today. What's happening? It lowered life expectancy, and it needs to be front and center. So this isn't even just about Venezuela. This is about America as a country. And so most people, if you ask them, they would say China and Mexico. That's the one that Trump talks about. Those are the countries that politicians will talk about. And Trump even put tariffs on China back in, February, March, 10, I think 20% tariffs on China. And he accused the Chinese Communist Party of actively sending and growing its fentanyl production in order to send it to the U.S. He accused the Chinese, the Communist Party of China, of poisoning American citizens. So Trump, knows this very well. But if you actually look at the reports and the history, the timeline of the opioid crisis in the last several years, it really started in 2013, 2014. It became fentanyl. It originally was prescription opioids, OxyContin, in the early days of the opioid crisis. Then it became heroin. And then 2013, fentanyl started to show up. And by 2016, fentanyl was everywhere. And the death rate, the overdose rate, how often people were dying from the overdoses, how deadly they were, skyrocketed. There were a huge increase in opioid deaths. And pretty soon, President Trump, within a couple of years, President Trump had gotten China to agree to crack down on fentanyl manufacturing and trafficking, because it could go through Mexico, but it could also just be purchased online and sent directly through the mail to the United States. So there was fentanyl coming from China at that point, and but China agreed in 2018 to crack down on the production and on the trafficking, and they had a class-wide ban on fentanyl and fentanyl precursors. So the chemicals that are needed to make fentanyl, this drug that's killing Americans, China banned. However, and so you saw, what I show in my piece is you see the best measure I could find was statistics from United States Customs and Border Protection, which reported a 96% decrease in interdictions or interceptions of fentanyl coming from China across the U.S.-Mexico border. So 96% reduction is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, fentanyl deaths are continuing to increase. So that fentanyl has to be coming from somewhere. Now, at the same time, who starts getting mentioned in U.S. government reports is India. India is picking up the slack. India has a massive pharmaceutical industry, which already supplies something like 40% or more of our generic pharmaceuticals in the United States. And so it's well positioned to pick up that slack where China cracks down, and criminal organizations in China can, instead of sending directly from China to the United States, they can send their product to India and then ship it out. So, the borders aren't, these transnational criminal organizations are not, of course, staying inside, one country, operating from just one country. They'll use whatever combination of borders they need to. So,
if we could just make this distinction, because heroin is grown from opioids in Asia, but India can make fentanyl because it's lab grown. It's a synthetic, right? So anybody could do it. So we can't any longer be like, well, this comes from cocaine.
Poppy fields,
right?
In
The
Afghanistan,
poppy fields or the coca
Precisely.
plants. We're now talking about sort of a phantom manufacturer. So it really could be anywhere. So you're making the point that it can be manufactured in India.
Yes, and India has an incredible pharmaceutical industry. It's also extremely corrupt. It has very weak enforcement, law enforcement. It's, China has a centralized system, so it's easier for them, even though they're a larger economy still, just though India is growing tremendously. India has a centralized system. It's much easier for it to crack down on something like that. China has that centralized system. India does not. So even if India, the thing is, even if they wanted to, they chose not to, because when China took those measures to have a class-wide ban on fentanyl precursors coming into the United States, India did not do that. India banned some of the most common ones, but it is very easy for chemists to sidestep, for producers to sidestep those regulations by just altering the chemical compounds they use and just making fentanyl slightly different. And then you're skirting the regulations. So in my mind, it can't be understood as anything but that's not an accident. That has to be intentional, that they did not do what our supposed adversary did. China, we're told, is the boogeyman, is the bad guy, and India is our closest ally. Tulsi Gabbard in March, when she went to India, she declared to Modi, to President Modi or Prime Minister Modi, that India, the Indo-Pacific, meaning India, is the geopolitical center of the 21st century. Okay, so this is like, you can't really understate how big India is going forward. They have the largest population in the world already. They're outpacing China, which has tremendous population problems going forward. India is going to be the big dog of this century, and the U.S. government knows it. That's why Tulsi Gabbard was there. And they are sending very significant amounts of fentanyl into the country that is still, to this day, killing, according to President Trump, what he blamed China for, is 140 overdose deaths every day on fentanyl. And, again, these are working class. This isn't like old people who are about to die. This is, working people with families, and it's actually reduced life expectancy. So, go ahead, Clayton.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, because what I think you're saying here, and then when you talk about Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, what sort of role does like the U.S. strategic partnership have with India in sort of like suppressing and or obscuring all of this? Because it's like, oh, we can't admit that India, our friend, is really the entire driver of fentanyl in the United States. What would that do to our friendship and all of the manufacturing that we're everything else we're doing there?
Firstly, I can't say absolutely that China or that India is the primary driver. There's still, I'm sure, fentanyl coming from China in, illicit ways. It's very hard to crack down on that completely. And the transnational criminal organizations, of which Mexican cartels are involved in too, they are, tricky. But and there's no figures on precisely how much is coming in, for one thing, because it's a black market, so it's not tracked at a normal level. But even if you judge by basically these factors that I've laid out, of China cracking down, India increasing its production and appearing in U.S. government, State Department, Drug Enforcement Agency, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and UN reports that India is at least a primary, if not the primary provider of fentanyl and fentanyl precursors that make it to the United States, then I think, it's clear. India, to me, it has to be suspected of being the number one, and it's our very close ally. So if you look at, well, we have an incredible amount of not only people who have been involved in, the India lobby, which is very substantial in this country, and people who are close to pro-Indian business interests and political interests, like Tulsi Gabbard. There is no one who epitomizes that more. As a freshman member of Congress, she was, going to meet with Modi. As she's part of the India caucus. A lot of her donors are pro-India. I mean, she's Hindu. She's very close with Indian interests, and that's been underplayed, I would say, vastly. Okay, you also have Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, who worked as a registered foreign agent for India for 2 years until she joined the Trump administration. You have Mike Waltz, former national security advisor turned UN ambassador, who was the co-chair, I believe, of the India caucus in Congress. You have not only people who are unusually pro-India and close to Indian interests in the United States, but you also have actual Indian nationals, many Indian nationals or first-generation Indian Americans in key positions throughout the government and in appointed and elected positions. Even if we just look at the very top in the Trump administration, of course, you have Tulsi Gabbard and the other ones I mentioned, but you have Jayanta Bhattacharya, who's now the director of the NIH. He was born in India. You have, I have them listed here. You have some of them. You have Ranjit Gill, a guy known as Ricky Gill. I don't know if everyone has ever heard that name, but he doesn't get much attention. He's the senior director for Central and South Asia Affairs at Trump's National Security Council, where he is dealing specifically with the issue of India. His grandfather was a British army officer in India. So that's like an incredible conflict of interest where, imagine if you had a Russian in the U.S. government dictating policy on Ukraine. That would be like, well, maybe you shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Right.
You have, Kush Desai, White House Deputy Press Secretary, Saurabh Sharma, Special Assistant to the President for Personnel, Sriram Krishnan, the Silicon Valley venture capitalist turned senior White House policy advisor on AI, Anjani Sinha, U.S. Ambassador to Singapore. This is just the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. So what I've found, and I'm going to show this, get deeper into this in further investigations, the India lobby doesn't begin to describe the incredible influence machine that India has established in the United States with the help. It's not like it was opposed at any level, and it's completely bipartisan. And this is going back to 2000, where Silicon Valley, the CEO of Google, the CEO of IBM, just key figures everywhere are Indian nationals. And this isn't racism against Indians. It's just that there has been an incredible appearance of what I would describe as an Indian superclass since 2000. Since 2000, we've seen 70% of Indian migrants have come since 2000. Of course, that issue exploded with the HB1 visas. And so at the same time, you have basically Americans being poisoned, the American working class being poisoned and killed off by our government in cahoots with India. You have huge amounts of Indian workers coming to the United States and,
filling those positions.
Filling those positions, precisely. And now this whole pretext of China, of Venezuela providing fentanyl, which is actually coming from India, the Trump administration wants to use to destroy Venezuela and send a bunch of migrants here to take even more like low-paying jobs, which a lot of Americans don't want to do anyway. But there's no way that they don't know, that the Trump administration, that Tulsi Gabbard doesn't know. She actually said it. And when she delivered her 2025 threat assessment, I guess, to Congress as the director of national intelligence, she said that fentanyl is coming, this isn't an exact quote, but primarily from China and India. She said it. So you would think if Tulsi Gabbard is a patriotic American and is worried about what should be the number one issue in America of people dying by the hundreds per day, then you would think she needs to look. She would have all of the avenues right there in front of her. Yeah. She's so close to India; it would be a piece of cake for her. But that didn't come up, as far as I know, when she went for a 3-day trip to India in March. This is the elephant in the room, and it's something that I'm devoting myself to getting into, not only because of issues like foreign policy, but what's happening in our country, where you go to the doctor, they prescribe you some opioids, or I'm sorry, some OxyContin or whatever it is, because you have a little surgery or something, and all of a sudden you're hooked on that stuff, and you are an addict, and oops, you overdose and die. It's not just people, of course, who are making bad decisions and into drugs for recreational reasons and that kind of thing and down and out. It's people who just get sucked in and fall in and die from opioids. And this crisis has completely normalized. And I'm pretty certain it's our top ally, India, that is supplying the poison.
Gosh.
Wow.
Well,
I'm sort of speechless about it, but
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like the other day we were doing a story on Venezuela. We were, and I'll wrap it up now, but, last week we were doing a story on Venezuela and hitting these drug boats. And someone in the chat room was like, yeah, but, you guys are criticizing this, but you've never had anyone in your family that had died of fentanyl overdose. Well, we know people, of course, that have. But you're looking at the wrong catalyst here. You're looking at Venezuela when you should be looking at China and India. And with the help of the United States, like turning their back on this and facilitating this. And you're lying to the American people about attacking Venezuela over fentanyl coming into the United States when you've got this cushy relationship with India and turning a blind eye to it. So anyway, I just want to say that. But Dan, thank you for this reporting. Did you want to say something else?
Oh, I was going to say follow Dan's reporting on Uncaptured Media. He's got a YouTube channel and a X account, and Uncaptured Media is where you'd find his great work.
Uncaptured.media. He's one of those new, newfangled URLs.
Yeah.
So uncaptured.media. Dan, great work on this, and keep us posted. Hopefully we'll see if the administration responds to you. Thank you so much, Dan.
Yeah, it was cheaper than uncaptured.com, I think, which was a lot more expensive. But no, I appreciate you having me on, you two having me on to talk about it. And I should say there are two other people on the internet who I know of who are talking about this, and I really can't find it's mind blowing to me that I'm the kind of first journalist, I guess, to sort of be breaking this story open, because it's of tremendous national importance. You can, I mean, think of if 140 people were dying every day in a war, 140 Americans were dying every day in a war, it would be front page news all the time. So it's really blown my mind to kind of start digging into this. But I have to, give a lot of credit to the people who turned me on to this story. A guy named Mark Kulak, who has his own show called Housatonic.its, and I really encourage people to take a look at Mark's work, and also Jonathan J. Cooey, who I know I've talked about before on this show. He has a channel called Gigome Biological. He talks about this too, and he's done a lot of very serious analysis, working this in with COVID-19 and things we'll get into in further future interviews, I hope. But and I know you two are trying to have Jonathan J. Cooey on, and I hope that happens. So
we're working on that.
Yeah, I appreciate you two having me on to go after this.
Always. Thank you so much for your great reporting, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Great to see you, man.
Definitely.
Keep up the great work.